Hi there, welcome into the studio. We are working on a series in tapestry weaving. I'm doing a basic tapestry, going over some basic tapestry techniques. I have a PDF design on my website, textileindie.com, that you can print off. You can find the link in the description below. And we've been working through this design, working on tapestry weaving for the last few weeks. If you want to see the previous content in this series, you can find that in the description below and on my tapestry weaving page on my website, textileindie.com. I have all of the videos in this series, as well as supplemental material and resources for the tools and materials. I go over how to build your own tapestry loom out of PVC pipe, how to get that set up, how to warp it, how to start your weaving, and weave in plain weave doing different shapes. We've gone over angles, we've gone over plain weave to create stripes, and today we're going to do curves. So if you reference your printable, we've done this angled section, and you can see mine is quite large compared to this image. Now I'm going to move on to these curves. And if I slide my cartoon, this PDF printable, in between the warp here, so it's underneath my warp, I can kind of gauge where this design is going to be. And a technique you can use in tapestry weaving is using a Sharpie to draw out your design lines onto the warp threads that you're weaving over in order to kind of add a guide for your weaving. And for this curve design that we're working on, I have put in some lines, and it might be difficult to see on camera, but I've put in these design lines by coming in and gently adding a mark on each of the warp threads in the curve that I want to weave my tapestry with. So I've come in, and you may have to go in and each individual warp press the tip of the Sharpie onto that warp thread to get it to pick up the ink. This will help you to see directly on your specific tapestry warp where your design needs to land. So once your design lines are in place, you can start weaving. If you haven't watched the plain weave or the angled weave video, I suggest going back and watching that. I show you how to create a butterfly, which is a bundle of yarn. Organize your weaving yarn or your weft yarn so that it doesn't get tangled. For my design, I'm going to do this side, this mountain, I'll call it, with the green, and then this mountain over here with this yarn here. This is Black Eyed Susan naturally dyed wool yarn, and this is Calendula naturally dyed wool yarn. So I'll start out by weaving the curved piece that looks like it's forward or in the front. And I'm choosing to weave this one because this curve right here is the most pronounced edge that I want to create. If we did this one first, you're creating an edge or having to guess where that edge is going to land, and you don't end up with as clean of a line. Also, this line right here, the top of this curve, overlaps or flows over the warp, so it would be more challenging to get into this edge right here when you have a woven section and you're trying to weave under that woven section. Just makes it more difficult to get your threads in and pack them and weave. So when you're choosing which piece to weave first, choose the piece that's forward or the piece that has the curve to the outside rather than wrapping over a section of the warp. Now I'm going to be weaving this in plain weave as I've been doing, and beading my rows down with this comb. This is a simple plastic comb, and I have my shed sticks set up here ready to go. I've been using these for my plain weave, and you can see how to set these up in the plain weave and shed sticks video, linked in the description below. So just find which shed stick you need to lift to create the opposite weave of that previous row, and mine is this upper one. So I'm going to come in here, and from the left I'm going to weave over midway across my tapestry to where that first warp thread, this first sign of the curve, shows up. So I have one more to pick up here, and I'll leave a 5-inch tail and angle my weft thread in so that I have enough ease. I'm not pulling my tapestry in by stretching my weft thread out. Okay, so this warp thread is where my first design line is showing up. The Sharpie is showing up here, and that's this point right here on my tapestry design. I want to go around that thread. So I'll lift my warp on the opposite shed stick. I'm going to go around this warp and underneath through these. Again, this is basic plain weave. It's set up with my shed sticks. I'm not finger picking this design. So it's going to move a little bit quicker. If you're going in and finger picking every other one, that means one, that you have to pay closer attention to what you're doing, and two, it often means that mistakes are made because this is such a tight space. It can be easy to skip a thread or miss a thread, especially if your lighting isn't really good. So I like having the shed sticks to avoid that problem. So I'm going to weave on this warp thread, or to this warp thread right here, where that first section of the curve is landing, until I meet the point on this second warp thread over towards the left. So I'm following the curve of my design by stair stepping over one every couple turns. And when we did the angle, we did a consistent pattern. So I did 3 wraps around each warp thread and then shifted to 2 wraps around each warp thread in this upper section. Here, we're not going to have that consistency. It's kind of intuitive. You change how many warp threads as you shift up the curve in order to create that curve. So here I might do 3 or 4 turns around this one warp thread and then go to the next thread over and do maybe 2 around that next one, and then maybe 1 around the following one. It just depends on how dramatic the curve is and what shape you want to be creating. Here I went 1 too many. I'm gonna go back 1, there we go, and lift the opposite shed stick. And you can also gauge this as you weave. You don't have to decide right at the beginning. Oh, I did screw that up. Okay, back this one up. Go back under. If you have to unweave, this is what you do. You just lift the same shed stick that you lifted originally, send your thread back through, and then do it once again to grab all of the threads that you need to. So I'm going to grab this one as well, send this through and pack it down. Again, try not to pull on your yarn so that it's taut. You want to add some looseness in the body so that it keeps this nice straight side shape. Okay, and I think that this pass here will be my last time on this warp thread, and I'll shift over from this point. So do 1 more over this one, like so, and then I'm going to skip over to the warp thread just to the left of that. So 1 warp thread over. You can skip over multiple warp threads if your curve is that dramatic. You can skip 2 if you need to. I'm just following this curve, and it is shifting over 1 warp thread at a time, basically. So I'm following that pattern. One loop around this second warp thread to the left, and now this will be my second loop as I pass back in the other direction. And now it looks like, so I'm right under where this black mark is from the Sharpie. I could shift over to this 3rd warp thread over, or do another loop around this one. It's kind of gauge, and I can also test it out and see by passing over and doing a quick wrap to see if that works. If if I like that height. Again, I'm not counting my rows here, I'm basing it off of the pin marks. So here I can test this by looping around, and I think that's actually taller than I want it to be, or higher. So I'm going to go back one warp thread and start going around this third warp thread over. So you can start to see my curve happening, and it's very stair-steppy, it's very pixelated in that we're going over one warp thread at a time, so it's kind of like Legos stacking on top of each other, or pixels, you're seeing it in box form. Each warp is its own little box that we're filling with color. So we're seeing that form up this curve, and I'll continue weaving in my green along this curve here, adding yarn as I go. I probably won't need to add yarn. I did 25 wraps, and that's probably going to be enough to finish this section, but you can add yarn if you need to, and if you want a refresher on that, you can watch the angle video. I show how to incorporate new yarn. You create a new bundle and leave your tails at the edges so that you have enough to tie off or weave in once you're done with your tapestry. So continue with this side of the shape, and when I have finished this section, I'll come back and show you how to do the second side of this curved section. Now when you have the first section of your curved, or your hills or mountains or whatever you want to call them, woven, you can see my line here followed along there. I am going to now grab a tapestry needle, and this is a tapestry needle that's small enough that I can slide it through the loops on each turn or warp thread and pull the new yarn through. This side of the curved edge, you can either build like we did the angled edge, where there is space in between each turn. There's a little gap, and we filled those gaps by leaving some looseness in the weft as we wove. But this one, I want to show you a different joint where you actually are twining the pieces together or looping them together like this. So we're going to take the needle and send the new thread through the loop in the other direction. So let's load up our needle with this guy. Now pull the length through so you have a bit of overlap. This will just help you not have to pull as much through your weaving. And now we're going to start weaving like we did before, making sure to lift the right shed stick, correct shed stick. So I'll slide my hand here, and I want to make sure it's opposite of that stripe there, and I'm kneading across to this first section of the warp thread, and then you'll glide your needle between those warps and pull the length through, making sure to leave your tail like so, and then pack this first row down. And now for each pass, we're going to send the needle through one of the loops in the green. So I'm going to come to the bottom green loop here, send my needle through that section, pull all the way through so that they're joint like so. And now I'll lift the shed stick in the opposite direction. This might be challenging to lift up because that first curved section is in the way. It's blocking our shed stick from working a bit. Send this back through the other direction. Pull through, pack it down. And we'll do the same thing, meeting up to the green and sending our yarn through the next loop up. And then grab this loop here. Don't stick your needle through the warp thread, just the weft thread. You don't want to accidentally grab warp because you want the weft to be able to slide up and down on your warp thread. And if you accidentally stitch it with your needle, it will hold it in place too much. Okay, and now I've caught all the loops that are on this warp thread, so I'm going to shift over one more and go in the catch the loops on this next thread. So just grab the warps that will lead you up until that point, and you're going to continue this up the curve of your shape, catching each warp thread as you go. Sorry, each weft loop as you go. So here I would come in and catch this lower loop, like so, pull through, pack it back down, and now go back in the other direction. Now with these two curved edges in place, we're going to do this section in between with a different color, and you're going back and forth, building up in the stair step pattern, catching each thread as you go. So if you have one loop around this edge, you'll meet up with that loop and then build up across, build up one loop on this warp, and then extend over one warp all the way across until you reach the peak. And we're going to create a background that goes all the way across here and then do another section of stripes like this. Option here is to catch your edges like you did on this section where we caught it with the tapestry needle. You can catch your edges all the way across here, or just pick your warp threads and weave across, butting up the ends together like we did for the angled weave. That's an option too. And I'm picking these threads so that I don't have to use the shed sticks, which at this point don't want to pull up this deep in the curve. So it makes it easier without the shed sticks at this point in the weaving. So here's the completed curved section of this tapestry. It's this section on the PDF printable. You can see I did the tapestry needle joint here in the lower section, and then on the edges here I just did a step up joint where I wove to the stair step of the curve and then back across. I've completed the background here, and now we're ready to move on to another section of stripes. So go ahead and put in 4 rows of stripes, and I did 3 rows of each color to create this little ditty here, and that will repeat here as well. Thanks so much for joining me in this video on doing curves. Be sure to check back next week. We will be doing the diagonals, building those in the top of our weaving. Check out the description below for all of the resources, tools, materials, and videos in this series, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video. Thanks for being here. Bye.